the last episode of Bonding Over Science, we discussed the health and environmental impacts of harmful algal blooms and if this could turn into the fictional series The Last of Us in real life. Spoiler alert, algae in the atmosphere won't turn you into a zombie. On the other hand, this show has viewers curious if research on fungi shows a threat to spreading as depicted on the fictional show. Google recently announced, "Can fungus control humans?" as a worldwide breakout search this year. I'm Dawn Stringer with Bonding Over Science. Let's dive into the underground world of fungi. The HBO series The Last of Us has taken the country by storm, posing the question if organisms like fungi could be harmful to humans. EMSL's functional and systems biology science area leader, Scott Baker, is the self-proclaimed fun guy of fungi, and he is the perfect person to tell us more about the relationship between his research and the imagined world of The Last of Us. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today on Bonding Over Science.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here.
Now, I want to ask you the hardest question of the day. Is it fungi or fungi?
Either one works. I go with fungi.
Okay, I usually say fungi.
Yeah, well, I've been called a fun guy. That's a joke that's used quite often when people meet me.
Okay, so I'll stick with that one. How
Okay.
about that? So a big reason why I wanted to talk to you today was something that I saw from Google. They actually showed on their Instagram that "Can fungus control humans?" is a worldwide breakout search for the year, which I'm sure we could credit to The Last of Us, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me, have you heard of The Last of Us? And if so, how did you hear about it?
I have heard of The Last of Us. I first heard about it from my son, who played the video game and loved the video game. And as soon as the HBO series came out, we started watching it. Now we're a couple episodes behind because he's a busy high schooler and I'm also busy, I guess. And so we haven't had time to finish it out, but I've enjoyed it so far. Actually, it's the other way around. We tend to control fungi more than they control us. I mean, there are some things that fungi do that can be bad, but for the most part, we have a long history of controlling fungi.
Now, what was it like bonding with your son over The Last of Us, and did it make him more interested in your field of work?
Oh, it's always good when you can find common ground with your teenagers, and I think that he enjoys the fact that I study fungi, so he could ask me questions about, is this real? Is this a realistic thing, or is this not a realistic thing? So that was great.
What do you think of the depiction of this zombie fungus on the show? You kind of touched on it, saying that we control fungi more than it controls us, but what do you think of this depiction?
I think that it's important. Fungi for a long time have been important microbes in the lives of humans, but they haven't been recognized as much as some of the bacterial pathogens as really serious pathogens. So I think it's good. Was it any press is good press? It increases people's awareness that fungi are all around us. It's coincident with the WHO coming out with a report on fungal pathogens of concern. Their first list was in October. So I think it is a good time to be a fungal biologist. As far as the depiction goes, I think some of the background has been really interesting and fairly accurate. I really don't think that fungi are going to infect us and control us and turn us into zombies. As I said, we've used fungi for our purposes for a long time, for bread, alcohol like beer and wine, but also in traditional Asian food production such as soy sauce and sake. So like I said, it's been the other way around. We've really controlled the fungi to do our bidding. More recently, we've used fungi for production of citric acid. That process was discovered in 1913. We've used fungi for production of enzymes to help us digest food. I think that patent is 1896 for digestive enzymes. And then we're using fungi now to help us both degrade plant material so that we can get it into sugars and then fermenting it into biofuels, bioproducts, and potentially biomaterials.
Are there other industrial ways to use fungi?
I think people are starting to explore plastic deconstruction by microbial enzymes, including those of fungi. Fungi can degrade, like I said, plant biomass and other kinds of stuff in nature. When you see fungi growing on something, it's digesting. I always say we live in the fungal digestive tract because the fungi digest the world around them, whereas we ingest food and put it in our stomach. The fungi, the world is their digestive tract.
Is it possible for it to lead to mind-altering behavior?
I'm not a medical professional, but certainly there are compounds produced by fungi that can be mind-altering. There is a theory that some wheat contaminated by fungi that produce ergot had played a role in the Salem witch trials. I'm not an expert again, so I think there's a little bit of debate. So a variety of mind-altering compounds, magic mushrooms, etc., are fairly well described. So yeah, the fungi can lead to produce compounds that can impact your cognitive processes.
Well, it seems like it's in more places than we may have realized.
Oh, absolutely. I would just return from a conference where they talked about using fungi as building materials.
Do you think this is something that is a positive impact to the environment, to use these for industrial purposes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we can, move away from things that are land intensive or use a lot of resources to grow, like I guess a cow for both meat and leather, then I think, the more choices there are in the market that are economically viable, the better off we are.
Absolutely. Now, how does it form into the organism that it is?
Well, fungi are really cool because they have a whole bunch of different growth modes and lifestyles. So you've got yeast so yeast-like growth is a single cell that just divides. I tend to look at molds where they form these hyphae, which are these long tubes that kind of grow at their ends. Obviously, mushrooms are fruiting bodies of fungi. A little outside my expertise, but they like to grow. That's all I can say.
Because they like to grow, is it possible for it to ever evolve into something that we see like in The Last of Us? I know it's a little dramatized on the TV show, but is that even a possibility?
I don't think we're going to have fungi controlling us and making us zombies. I think at worst, there are a number of diseases where fungi grow like any other microbe infection. Because fungi are eukaryotes and have mitochondria and subcellular compartments, that they can be a little harder to kill. So we need to continue to search for good antifungal drugs. I think that's where there needs to be effort that kind of matches what we have in antibiotics. But I'd see people getting sick, not turning into zombies.
How is EMSL helping you advance your research in fungi?
Well, EMSL is an amazing user facility that has a lot of expertise and capabilities to understand the cell biology of fungi, to look at the molecular underpinnings of different kinds of metabolic pathways, to look at the structure of enzymes. So there's a lot of tools here that help myself and my colleagues understand how fungi fit into the different niches that they live in, and how can we then either understand how carbon is cycling in the environment, with fungi in soil and associated with plants, or how can we then take these processes and turn them into biotechnological advances that can lead to fuels and products. So I think you have to have that fundamental knowledge that then you can use to engineer these organisms to do your bidding. So again, we want to be in control, and we have been for centuries.
So what kind of instruments here at EMSL are helping you with this research?
Wherever applicable, we use microscopes, mass spectrometry to look at proteins and metabolites, microscopes to look at subcellular compartments. We've started an initiative to look at the structure of fungal proteins where we don't necessarily know what the protein does, but maybe getting a structure of the protein would help us understand that in conjunction with other studies that we could do in genetics. So I think it's kind of limitless what we can do. If I haven't used an instrument, it's probably because it's on me that I don't necessarily know what it could offer.
Now, something I want you to leave us with before you go is, what is something you wish people knew about fungi?
I think fungi have been intertwined with human life for centuries, and oftentimes for our benefit. Of course, there's times where fungi have caused plant disease or human disease, and those are important to study, but I think that in the long run, fungi offer us limitless possibilities for helping us live a more sustainable existence in changing times. So fuels, chemicals, materials can be produced by fungi. And then fungi also play a really important role in the environment, cycling carbon and other elements, nutrients, as they pass through the environment. So fungi are important for animals, plants, other fungi. They're really interesting.
Where can our listeners go to learn more about your research?
Well, I occasionally tweet. @Moldomics is my Twitter handle. They can check journal indexes for papers that I've co-authored with colleagues. And if they ever see me at a conference or in an airport, they should feel free to ask me about fungi. Tell me that I'm a really fun guy.
There you go. That's what we'll leave our listeners with, the fungi of fungi. You said it, not me.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I brought that on myself.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Dawn.
Now that we have some background on what fungi is and what it is realistically capable of, I wanted to get a take from another expert on the topic. Davinia Salvachua is another expert in the fungi world, and she's also an EMSL user, meaning her research project was awarded funding to use EMSL resources to advance her research. I was excited to catch back up with her and get her take. Knowing your research area, I have to ask you if you've heard about The Last of Us.
I have heard about it. First, I learned about it because of video games. My partner loves video games, and I was exposed to The Last of Us, not only the first part, but the second one.
So as a scientist watching the show, how scientifically accurate is the concept? How dramatized is it in your perspective?
Well, it's highly dramatized, but that's what it sells, right? Like, that's an apocalyptic universe. But I really loved, especially the two first episodes, they were mentioning more fungi. I think that at the end of the story, it moves more towards people, like every apocalyptic story. But in the first two episodes, they were really giving some science insights. So they were talking about mycelia, how the mycelia connects miles away. But in this case, it's not like in nature that mycelia connects with fungi far away and they feel that chemistry. But in this case, in the TV show, it's mycelia can communicate 1 mile away and can wake up a zombie. So yeah, the outcome was different for the relationship of these mycelia. But then in terms of the fungi that was infecting people in the TV show Cordyceps, yeah, they are really taking that into account, right? In nature, they infect insects and they modify their brain so they have a special behavior so they can continue reproducing. In this case, it's the same. They infect humans, they become infected, and then their brain operations like a zombie. And then at the end, it's in nature we know that the fungi utilizes the insect as a substrate, as a carbon source. So they are here in the TV show, when they are infected for a long time, is the same thing. They basically eat the human. But again, that's very dramatic. We know that right now, fungi cannot grow at the high temperatures of the human body. So that's something at the moment, that is not possible.
Well, what can the show, in addition to what you just told me, what can it teach us about fungi?
It's teaching us that it's a smart organism. I still believe that fungi are very unknown organisms. They have their special kingdom, And as some of my colleagues say here at ENREL, is that in my center, that they look more like squirrels and mammals than bacteria. And I kind of agree. They are hairy, like they look like hairy, so they look more like a squirrel. But there is still a lot we need to understand from these organisms. Like, of course, like from the pathogenic point of view, like we are studying a lot in plants, like sources that humans utilize for food, in some insects, but normally, well, they also infect humans, as we know, in the skin. But those are probably for human health purposes, they are more studied than for other purposes.
What kind of purposes can fungi be used for?
So, and that's where my research comes. And I am saying for human health, but fungi have been utilized forever. But right now, like more complex fungi, filamentous fungi, I think that there are still a lot of options for them that we need to continue exploring. And right now, like there is a fashion on how to utilize fungi for food. Like instead of utilizing like eating what we know as the fruiting body, they are utilizing just the proteins from the fungi and mimic meaty foods.
So you mentioned some of your research here at EMSL and how the different purposes of fungi is something that you look into. So tell me more about your research here and why it's important to society.
In my case, I am working with a very specific of organisms. They are called white rot fungi. This group of organisms is really good degrading lignin, and lignin is the most recalcitrant polymer in plants, and this means that it's very difficult to degrade this polymer. So this group of organisms, these fungi, they have evolved to do this in nature. In fact, there is one of my favorite papers. It was published in Science in 2012. And the author said that one of the main hypotheses for the Carboniferous period to end was that white rot fungi evolved to degrade lignin at the time. So that was one of the reasons about why carbon accumulation in our planet decreased. So that's like a very important event in our planet. But what is even like truly fascinating to me is that after 300 millions of years, these organisms are still the most efficient in nature doing that. So when we think of carbon cycling, like all the turnover of wood in the forests, these white rot fungi are key for that purpose. Like, of course, there are other organisms, but for lignin degradation, these are key. So in my project with EMSL, we are really trying to understand how that happens inside the fungi. Because even in my thesis, we were trying to understand how they break down the lignin, which are the mechanisms to break it down. But we never care about what happens inside the fungi, what they are feeling. So that's basically what we are trying to understand now. So eventually we could utilize these organisms as biocatalysts to convert carbon from lignin to biochemicals, biofuels, or value-added products.
What kind of tools do you use at EMSL that has helped you advance your research?
So most of the instruments we have been utilizing are related to omics. So basically what we are trying to understand, like to understand what the fungi feel, we are utilizing transcriptomics to see the gene expression, how that changes if they are eating this component versus this component. So we can see what happens at the gene level. Also proteomics, so we can see what happens at the protein level. And then the product of that is metabolites. So we are also doing metabolomics, in this case is NMR metabolomics, to understand that.
What's so important about understanding each level of what you're looking at?
So you can have a whole picture of the whole process, because many times like a gene can be activated, but it's not going to produce the protein. So the protein is a confirmation of what the gene is doing. But this doesn't mean that transcriptomics is also very important, because some of that, those increases in the expression of genes, they do not always have to end up on a protein. They can be transcription factors, or like that they are going to be more involved in the regulation of the whole network. So I think that integrating transcriptomics, proteomics, and then ultimately metabolomics, that's going to give you a better picture of what is happening in the whole network.
So what are your hopes for the future with the research that you're doing here at EMSL?
I think there are many possibilities because it's true that now we are focusing on how these fungi degrade lignin and then what it happens inside the fungi. But I think at the end of the day, what we are also doing is understanding overall the metabolism of the fungi. So then we can utilize this information to develop other type of technologies or to modify these organisms genetically. So all this information is going to give us information about the regulation of all these processes. So then we can utilize that for other purposes.
Well, that's about all the questions that I had today. Is there anything else, any other information that you want to leave us with?
I think that I would recommend to watch the TV show. It's different compared to other apocalyptic stories. But I think it's a good relationship between fungi and humans. And I think that really brought my curiosity and attention to the show.
While there may be some scientifically accurate points in The Last of Us, it's safe to say we aren't anywhere close to facing a zombie apocalypse. Who knew fungi could be good for us and the environment in several ways? Turns out we're a lot more like fungi than we thought. I don't have time to cover it all, so don't forget to check out emsl.pnnl.gov for a full article on this topic featuring the two researchers I spoke with today. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms for the latest and greatest news coming from EMSL. EMSL is a DOE Office of Science national user facility that accelerates scientific discovery and pioneers new capabilities to understand biological and environmental processes across temporal and spatial scales. EMSL leads the scientific community toward a predictive understanding of complex biological and environmental systems to enable sustainable solutions to the nation's energy and environmental challenges. If you are interested in working with EMSL, learn more at emsl.pnnl.gov. That's emsl.pnnl.gov.